Mr. Bandyopadhyay, welcome to the Wharton School. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And thank you very much for coming to join us.
Thank you, Professor Singh. It is also very important for us to come to the Wharton School and discuss with a personality like you what are the things that the Government of India and particularly my ministry, that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, is trying to do.
Yeah. You know, perhaps we should start over there. To my knowledge, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is a new ministry, and perhaps you can say a little bit more about what is the context in which it was established, what is the mandate of the ministry, and in particular, if you could talk a bit about what are some of the key initiatives that you're taking. I'd be very interested to hear some more about that.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting question that you have put in. In fact, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is not a very new ministry in that sense.
Oh, is that right? That's amazing.
It always existed, but it was like a department.
Maybe it came more into the limelight recently,
That's right.
Yes.
It was Department of Company Affairs. DCA must be well known to you, I think.
In fact, I didn't realize that one morphed into the other. That's very interesting.
It must sound a familiar ring in your mind.
I know the Department of Company Affairs.
Yeah. So it was Department of Company Affairs. It was part of the larger ministry like the Ministry of Law and Justice. And sometimes it was part of the Ministry of Finance. And the Department of Company Affairs has been changed to the Ministry of Company Affairs about 5 years back. And then realizing the importance of the corporate world as such, and not only the company structure, the name of the ministry has been changed to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs about 3 years back. So now we are having this ministry, which is known as Ministry of Corporate Affairs. The mandate of the ministry is really very large. We, of course, administer the Basic Act, which is known as the Company Act. And we also administered a number of other professional bodies like the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Institute of Cost Accountants, and Institute of Company Secretaries. And recently, the Government of India has also enacted what is known as Limited Liability Partnership Act, LLP Act. So number of other legal issues which are being sorted out in this ministry. We have our wings, which is well known as the Company Law Board. We have also Competition Commission in India. Earlier we had the MRTP Commission, which is the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices
I know it
Act.
quite well because I studied it in management school.
That's right. So now that act, that body rather, that is no longer in existence. The work of that has been taken over by the Competition Commission and also Competition Appellate Tribunal. So these are the various activities that the ministry has been doing. But we have taken a very important motto. The motto of the ministry is that corporate growth with enlightened regulations. Whatever regulations you are making or changing or revisiting, those have to be enlightened regulations. Regulations for regulation's sake, whether it is law or rule or any code, that is not what we are looking for.
Could you, if I may just have you hold the thought, could you say a little bit more about the word enlightened? Would you unpack that a little more? Enlightened from what point of view?
Oh, sure. You see, the world is changing very fast, particularly in the economic sense. We all know what has happened in 2008, 2009. The company structure plays a very vital role in that direction. Now, let me give you a slight background of the structures that we have in India. We have something like 8 lakhs. Lakhs means
800,000.
800,000.
Yes.
800,000 companies who are active companies registered by our register of companies, who are actually our local officers who are working in the field.
Yes.
Out of that, we have about 83,000 which are known as public companies. Now, public companies in the context of the Indian Company Act means these are the companies which are slightly bigger, which can raise money from the public, which have the potentiality to be listed in future. Those are the public companies. And then we have something like 6,000, around 6,000 listed companies who are listed in the either in Bombay Stock Exchange or in the National Stock Exchange. And we have also, as you are well, you must be knowing very well, some of the government companies where the government has a stake more than 50%, either state government or the central government. So this is the basic structure of the companies which have been formed in India. Now, the company law is guiding how the company will transact its business, in the sense that the board functioning of it. What we have been trying by enlightened regulation is that the entire company law is being reviewed now. We will have a new company law, I am sure, by the end of this year. At present, the bill, as you know, India is a very vibrant democracy. The bill for the Company Act, that has already been placed in the House of the Parliament after long debate and discussions. And the Parliament has also formed a standing committee with a large number of parliamentarians in it. They have been scrutinizing the bill. They are looking into clause by clause, section by section, what is there in the bill. They themselves have also invited the opinions of others, the stakeholders. They may be industries themselves, they may be NGOs, they may be professional bodies. So they are giving their views, their opinions, and it has been on our website. So anybody can see it, can download it and give their views.
Yeah. I'd like to have our conversation go in a particular direction, if that's okay with you. And let me just give a bit of a preamble to what direction I would like us to go. I have been studying India and Indian business with great interest for almost 20 years now. In fact, I'm very, very proud of the fact that at Wharton we have a elective course that is completely devoted to Indian business. It's called Inside Indian Business, and I'm teaching it right now. My view, Mr. Bandyopadhyay, of corporations within a society, within an economy, is that it's important to think of them as engines of value creation. Put another way, it is not possible in today's global economy to think about a country that can have a vibrant economy and a strong, vibrant, thriving society without having corporations that are in fact on balance, creating more value in the economy than they are taking in. After all, corporations take in many inputs and then they put out outputs, and they are the engine of value creation. Value creation can happen in many different ways.
True.
Of course, one important, and this is the direction I would like to get your thoughts on, one of the very important ways in which value creation is governed within a corporation, governed in the interests of the broader society and the stakeholders, certainly the shareholders as well in a publicly listed company, the governance function becomes very, very crucial. I know that your ministry actually has come up with some new initiatives in this domain of corporate governance. So even before I would have you talk about what are some of the initiatives you have taken, perhaps if you have thoughts about what is the state of corporate governance in India today, if you might address that a little bit, and then we can turn next to what are some of the initiatives your ministry is taking.
Thank you very much. I think this is the most important thing that our ministry is trying to do, has taken initiative. And we totally agree with you. The corporations are basically there for the creations of values. Now, the ministry has a responsibility towards the corporate growth, unhindered growth, let me put it in that way. And as you know, the India that our GDP is growing very fast, and we all hope and expect that by next year it may touch the double-digit growth. So unhindered growth of the corporate sector is an essential thing in the Indian context. But at the same time, the ministry and the government has a responsibility towards investors who are investing their money in the company's growth, and towards the general people, towards the general public. So what we did in December 2009, for 1 week, we had the first ever India Corporate Week. And throughout India, with the help of all the national level trade and commerce bodies like CII, you might be well aware of the Confederation of Indian Industries, FICCI, Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry.
These are the apex bodies, the associations.
That's right. CII, FICCI, ASSOCHAM. We told them that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs cannot be associated with one particular group. The entire representative of the corporate sector of India should come forward. And they did come. And along with them, the professional bodies, like the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Institute of Cost Accountants, and Institute of Company Secretaries, they also came forward. So all the entire corporate world of India, they got together, and we had, it's unbelievable, 124 different types of programs in 1 week, that is starting from 14th December to 21st December throughout India. In all Tier 1 cities, Tier 2 cities, we had.
Oh, this was happening in multiple cities simultaneously. Very interesting. Yeah.
And the main focus was the corporate governance and the corporate social responsibility. And as you have been teaching about the Indian corporate situations here, you were well aware that for the last 20 years, a large number of committees have been formed, sometimes by the government, sometimes by the apex bodies, industry apex bodies, like Norris Chandra Committee, earlier to that Kumar Mangalam Birla Committee.
So, Narayan Murthy
Committee, many committees. So what we did from the ministry, we took up and different committees report. And the latest report, Norris Chandra Committee, and we put it on our website. We kept it for 1 month, requested everybody, all the stakeholders, to give their comments and views. And we have analyzed, collected, collated these things. And finally, during the closing session of this India Corporate Week, we brought out what is known as the Voluntary Guideline on Corporate Governance, in presence of the President of India, who herself was the chief guest.
In part based on the feedback that you heard on the different committee reports.
Exactly, the committee report, and also from our own experience, knowledge, whatever input we have got from various stakeholders. And if I may present, this is the book before you. So this is the book. It's a voluntary guidelines for the corporate governance.
Thank you very much. I look forward to going through them more carefully and in great detail. Perhaps it would be appropriate if you would just talk about some of the highlights of these voluntary guidelines.
You see, first of all, let us put it in this way. We have kept it a voluntary guidelines because the Ministry for MCA, the Ministry for Corporate Affairs, we don't want to make something which is absolutely codified, becomes a part of law, say that you follow it. If you don't follow it, then you are punished. We don't want to do that in the beginning. What we have in mind is, as I was explaining to you, the corporate sector in India is a very wide spectrum. We have very large companies who are also becoming now global companies.
Indeed.
But we have very small companies also. So we have given the best of guidelines as which has been evolved over a time, requesting, telling the companies that you adopt as many guidelines, as many clauses as possible which are suitable for your own company. If you cannot, for very genuine reasons, you may not be able to implement fully all these guidelines that the ministry has brought it out. You comply as much as possible. Where you cannot comply, you give an explanation. An explanation not to the ministry, not to our officials, not to government officials.
But to your shareholders.
But to shareholders, to your board.
Yeah.
You discuss.
Now, this is very interesting, and I suppose there is a role for these voluntary guidelines. On the other hand, of course, there is also Clause 49.
That's right.
And could you talk a little bit about the relationship between, in a sense, the regulatory side of governance in India? And, SEBI has a role to play, and there is Clause 49, and there are listing agreements, et cetera, and this voluntary guidelines that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is putting up. How do you see the two going together?
Actually, this voluntary guidelines is for everyone.
Right.
Any corporate body, they are supposed to adopt this voluntary guideline. SEBI Clause 49, as you have referred, these are only for the listed companies. These are agreement, basically.
Yeah.
There's agreement because this is a listing agreement that you can be listed only if you follow these guidelines. And the SEBI gets also its power under the Companies Act. Plus there is a special act for SEBI. But the basic act, which determines the conduct of the companies in India, that is the Company Act. Now, as I was telling you, that the Company Act itself
is being modified. Yes.
It will be a new Company Act. And many of the guidelines that we have given in this thing, we will also get more experience from the corporate sector.
Right.
And this will become a part of the new act.
Now, this is very helpful in sort of scoping out exactly how Clause 49 applies to listed companies. And in fact, the voluntary guidelines you're talking about are much broader.
True.
Not that I have any desire to be critical of what you're doing. These are all good, sensible things. But I could imagine a critic might say, unless there are some teeth to back up any kind of guidelines. The joke that is told is, this is a bit like being a Catholic preacher without sort of hellfire and hell and damnation. What is your thought about that? That how can companies follow if it is truly voluntary? And are there limitations? Is there thinking that might change over time? What are your views there?
No, I'm very happy that you raised this point. In fact, this point was raised back home in India also.
I'm not surprised.
many persons. But the fact remains that this is the first step in the beginning. If you kindly go through the preface that I have written and the foreword that has been given by our minister, Honorable Minister in charge of the corporate affairs, it has been made amply clear that we have given this voluntary guideline after considering all the pros and cons of the entire matter. Now, we want the corporates to be more responsible to themselves, to their shareholders, to the country as a whole.
And to the society.
To the society.
Yeah.
We don't want to press something down on them at the first instance. We have written there that 1 year we'll see the response of the corporate India. We'll also take the opinions, professors like you, who are sort of opinion makers in the whole world.
Well, thank you.
And many of you will be very surprised to know it has generated so much of interest and enthusiasm that during the last 3 months, in the ministry itself, we have received as many as 20 delegations from outside India. And they are discussing this matter. There are a number of conferences which are being held after these voluntary guidelines have been issued. So we'll gain by those experiences. And the government of India will revisit the entire thing after a year or so.
Yes.
There, it may be decided whether it will remain voluntary or, as you put it, whether some teeth should be given in it or some code should be made out of this voluntary guideline. That decisions will be taken after 1 year. We are keeping our options open.
I understand. And to your point about people like me and my colleagues being involved in some way, we are always happy to consider that. I should tell you just in passing that there are several of us who, in fact, are very deeply interested in India. 4 years back, I think it was 2007, maybe even 2006, I was instrumental in launching our corporate governance program, which has been happening every year and will be held again probably late this year in December. So there are multiple ways in which we might be able to provide input to the good things that your ministry is doing. I want to turn just a little bit, Mr. Bandyopadhyay, to the subject of corporate governance itself. It's very good that we are talking about the guidelines that your ministry has put forward. Would you like to say a little bit about, and if you don't want to go there, it's okay, we can change subjects. Would you like to say a little bit about where do you think is room for improvement in the world of corporate governance? I don't raise the example of Satyam lightly. These things can happen in the best governed countries. Frankly, we in America have our own share of corporate scandals. So it's not a matter of picking on India or an Indian company in particular. But one of the stunning things to me as a student of Indian business and someone who actually knew Ramalinga Raju and had met him several times, someone whom we had interviewed for our book, which is just out, called The India Way, how India's top business leaders are revolutionizing management. We were shocked when we saw this. How could there be a failure really not only at the level of corporate governance, certainly at the level of the audit committee? How could there be a failure really in the auditing process? How could there be a failure of the internal auditing function within the company? This was rather astonishing. I fully understand that this is an aberration. This is not a statement about Indian companies more generally. I have served on the boards of companies like Infosys and some private companies. There are very finely governed companies. But I raise the example just as an opportunity to talk about where are the areas in the domain of corporate governance where, in your opinion, improvements could be called for, and what might be some of those improvements?
I'm very happy that you raised this issue. In fact, this is one of the points that has been bothering the Ministry of Corporate Affairs while making the laws or making the guidelines or sending any other directions to the companies. Now, you see, one thing I hope that you will appreciate, that the entire Satyam episode, the government of India has played its part so well.
I must say I was quite impressed.
Yeah.
The government did play a very positive role, particularly the transition.
True. And not only that, you see, more important in a country like India, not a single person has lost his job. Satyam, as you said yourself, Satyam was a great company. It has very, very extremely competent professionals. They have their work order, the completely order book full, and they had a great reputation. So what we did is 50,000 persons who were working with the Satyam, the first priority that MCA had to see that the company does not collapse. And to that extent, the ministry was very, very successful. The CLB, the Company Law Board, it has passed an order where the entire directors, the board of directors were changed. The government nominated directors were appointed, and they did wonderfully well. They did extremely good work.
And that, I must say, pardon me for interrupting, I must say that viewing this from the outside, that process was handled quite well, actually. It was seamless. Getting the new chairman of the board in, getting the old directors out, nominating new directors, and then giving the core team time to choose new directors, then looking for somebody to purchase the company. All of this was handled quite well.
So that is the strength of the ministry. That is the strength of our legal system. That is the strength of our regulation. So that is what we have been able to do. Now, day-to-day corporate governance, if you see that, they're independent directors, which is sort of a hallmark for the corporate governance, they have the best of independent directors. I don't want to name them, but you know that they are the best available persons in the country. No, they have been there for a pretty long time. And
You're still referring to Satyam?
Yeah, yes. I'm still referring to Satyam. But the fact remains, the corporate governance had, to my mind, has three basic things. One is that independent directors have to do their job properly. They
if
must
I might paraphrase that, independent directors have to continue to act like independent directors and not become de facto employees of the company beholden to the management. That, in my experience, is sometimes where the crack occurs.
You are a professor. You said it very correctly. Yes. I mean, that is what it should be. Then the auditors have to do their job also. Indeed. Auditors should not be satisfied what the management is telling, but they should also do something more than that.
Like checking how much cash is in the bank account, for instance.
So these are some of the things. Now, if you see our new guidelines,
yes,
we have taken care of this type of things.
Yes.
But ultimately, in the ultimate analysis, it is the ethical question. It has become an ethical question.
Indeed.
Throughout the world, we don't have to name the companies or name the persons, auditor groups and other things. You know how things have collapsed in USA. Things have not gone so very well in Europe also for some of the companies. Now, everywhere, wherever I am going, and I am meeting my counterparts in various countries, this is a very big question. You can frame laws, you can frame regulations, but the persons who will be ultimately in charge, their ethical standard, and also their technical qualifications, their technical standard, their technical know-how, that should be improved, that should be increased. That is a very important thing. And there I see a very, very positive and distinct role of the professors like you and the Wharton Business School and other important renowned management schools throughout the world. Because the ethical standard of your students, who ultimately will be the managing directors or chairman of many companies,
indeed,
that has to be improved upon.
Yeah.
If we can't do that, if we can't impress upon that they are the custodians of the public money, they are the custodians, they are the trustee. I mean, if we go to the Mahatma Gandhi's concept
indeed,
of the trusteeship,
yeah,
they are actually the trustee of the nation.
This you raise, I think, a very, very important point, Mr. Bandyopadhyay. This notion of being a trustee and leadership as trusteeship, right, is something that needs to be strengthened not only in India, but even in America and many countries across the world. The notion that you are in a role and you are entrusted to look out for the interests of multiple stakeholders and that your own interests cannot be paramount. This is where some of the mischief has occurred, in my opinion. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I'm totally in agreement with you. And I feel that there, whether it is government bodies or whether professional institutions or it is universities, academic institutions like yours, all of us have a role and a responsibility that we should collectively, we should join together to improve this ethical standard of these things. In whichever way we feel that the trusteeship, the concept is a good concept, we also feel in many countries it is being experimented with.
Indeed.
How the people can really behave in the way they should behave. So that's a very, very important chapter.
And going back to this notion, and I like very much your allusion to Mahatma Gandhi because he indeed was writing about the notion of trusteeship and leadership as playing the role of a trustee. I think part of what my colleagues and I have been writing about and have noticed in our research on Indian companies, Indian management practices, there are some really unique ideas, different ideas that are coming out of India. Notion of leadership as a trustee, for instance, is a very much part of the Indian social ethos. I'd like to turn, before we end here, this very interesting discussion you and I have been having, I'd like to turn your attention to the domain of corporate social responsibility. I have, in fact, earlier, just a few weeks ago, been teaching a case on Tata Sons, and Mr. Gopalakrishnan, who's executive director of Tata Sons, joined us by video conference and gave an absolutely fabulous lecture to my students. And one of the things that is stunning about Tata Sons is that 2/3 of all the profits made by the Tata Group companies go into 2 charitable trusts. 2/3 of all the profits, and they are all plowed back into society, primarily Indian, but I think increasingly global society. I can think of very few companies in the world that are doing this, and they were doing it 100 years ago. So I think there is something unique about Indian business ideas, management practices, corporate leadership, particularly in the domain of corporate social responsibility. So I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts about the domain of corporate social responsibility, and indeed where India might have ideas to share which would change the practice in other parts of the world as well.
And thank you very much. In fact, you mentioned about the Tata Sons and the Tata Group. They have been doing this work for a fairly long time.
Over a century.
We are very proud of that. And many other companies who may not be so well known, they are also doing a lot of so-called, quote-unquote, the corporate social responsibility activities there. Some of our government companies, SOEs, the state-owned enterprises,
yes,
they have been doing also extremely well in many areas. In fact, you were aware that where the companies were set up, there was practically nothing, no infrastructure. So it was through some of the SOEs that infrastructure in the entire district maybe have been developed.
Indeed.
In that way, they have done an enormously great service. But the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, it has given its due attention to this aspect also. Along with the corporate governance, we have been aware that corporate social responsibility is a very important thing for our Indian corporate sector to attain the maturity. There are Tata Sons, there are other companies also they have been doing, but many other companies also don't know how to go about it or what is the importance about it. So along with the voluntary guidelines of the corporate governance, we also published a voluntary guidelines on corporate social responsibility.
Indeed.
And on the same day, it was also released. So we have not given any less importance to it.
Yes.
On the 21st of December, these guidelines have been also released. I would like to present to you also the voluntary guidelines on corporate social responsibilities.
I'd be very eager to read that as well. Thank you.
And here, many of the concepts that we have been discussing, many of the concepts had found a mention here. The corporate social responsibility nowadays, as we look at, it is not a charity. I mean, sometimes people think, they sort of mistake it for a charity. It's not. It's much more than that. It's a win-win situation. Unless you are involved in this, your brand value will not improve. The Tatas, throughout the world, everybody sort of respect the Tatas for many reasons. And certainly this is one of the most important reasons, as you have mentioned yourself. So similarly, the brand values of the companies will improve. In some cases, let us take a mining company. A mining company, if it is not greatly involved in the corporate social responsibility in its area of operation, in the modern age, it will be very difficult for them to carry on even their day-to-day activities.
Indeed.
So it's very important. It is not a one-way flow. It's very important that the company should realize that and realize they have a responsibility towards the larger society, and this will improve their own image, their own brand value, and if I may say so, their own business also.
Yeah. The way conceptually, Mr. Bandyopadhyay, that I have thought about this domain, corporate social responsibility, reflecting the values, the changing cultural norms of the society in the practices, policies, structures, philosophies of your company, this reflecting of what's happening in the rest of society, connecting back to the foundations of the society you are part of, is what gives a company, not the legal, literally the social legitimacy that is required. This is what gives you the right to exist. People frequently get confused and say, oh, the only business of business is to make money for the shareholders. But first you have to have the right to exist. Only then can you make money for your shareholders. So I just wanted to share that thought. I have one last question before we stop.
No, but let me say one thing.
A comment,
no,
yes.
One thing about it, that I could not have agreed more with you
yes.
on this particular subject. We particularly feel that the social legitimacy, as you put it very correctly, as well as the moral authority of
Indeed.
the company, that improves and increases as long as they are behaving in a very, very responsible manner.
Absolutely,
both in terms of the corporate governance, in terms of transparency, as well as in the corporate social responsibility.
So I have one last question. And let me set it up by saying I was very pleased to read a few weeks back Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, who happens to be someone I have met a few times, and I'm a very big admirer of his. He's doing great things and very great for India, and he will be remembered perhaps for hundreds of years because it's a turning point in Indian history starting in 1991. He said on a visit to Saudi Arabia, and this was kind of shockingly positive, that he believes over the next 25 years, the Indian economy is going to grow at 9 to 10% a year. I say this, it was shockingly positive because he's a very conservative man. I know him. And yet for him to make this bold statement, he must be very confident that this can be done. I want to focus in particular on one thing which, in my opinion, is going to be one of the stumbling blocks, and I'd like your comments on that. My sense is, Mr. Bandyopadhyay, that I cannot give you precise predictions in terms of how long it will take. But one of the gating factors for India's continued growth into becoming the kind of vibrant economy it has the potential to become, one important gating factor is the education sector. If you look at global rankings of the top 500 universities in the world, the Shanghai Jiao Tong University in Shanghai, China does this ranking. There are only 2 Indian institutions in the top 500. Believe it or not, the highest ranked one is Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, which is between 200 and 300 in the world. The only other one is IIT Kharagpur, which is between 400 and 500 in the world. By comparison, the United States has about 70 or 80 universities or institutions that are in there. China has about 30 or 40. And China is sort of much more comparable to India. In that context, I'm very intrigued by this news 2 days ago that the Parliament has passed on Monday, I think, on the 15th. No, not Parliament. The Cabinet has, in principle, agreed that this new foreign university education bill is going to be tabled before Parliament. I see this as a very positive step. Overall, would you comment on the role of the education sector? Because the corporate sector really takes as input what the education sector produces, and the corporate sector by itself will be stymied unless the education sector is coming along. I'm sure you have views on this. Would you share them with us?
No, thank you very much. But the point is that we are all working to fulfill the dreams of our very, very respected Prime Minister. And we are working in close coordination with the different ministries. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs, under the charge of a very dynamic minister, Mr. Salman Khurshid, we have been taking this, the corporate governance, corporate social responsibilities, bringing out various acts, making certain platforms available to them, making a cafeteria approach to any individual. They may go for a company structure, they may go for a one-man company structure, they may go for a partnership firm, they may go for a limited liability partnership firm. This is what we have been really engaged in. What you are saying is a very, very important point about getting our institutes, academic institutes, making them world standard. Under the dynamic leadership of the higher education minister, the education minister,
Mr. Sibal.
Mr. Sibal, lots of things are happening, lots of things are changing. I am sure that you will find some result very quickly from that sector. But we have been in close coordination, close touch with them, and India will not be lagging behind this much, I hope, and I can assure you on that.
I certainly hope so as well, because we at Wharton would really want to be part of that India of the next 40 years as it becomes the third largest economy in the world. Thank you so much, Mr. Bandyopadhyay. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's a pleasure.